In this video, I'm going to show you how I mount a small watercolor painting onto a wooden panel. This is an 8x10 panel, cradle panel. The watercolor painting is 8x10, and I have a little excess paper, and that's important. The actual dimensions of the watercolor are slightly larger than 8x10, and I'll explain why it's larger as I work my way through the video. Anyway, the first step, since it's watercolor on paper, right now it's water soluble, the first thing I need to do is seal the watercolor so it's not affected by the mounting process. Now I have two methods for doing this. My standard method, because my watercolors are usually large, some of them are 3 feet by 4 feet, and this method I'm going to show you here would not be practical. So what I usually do is either with golden acrylic gloss varnish or Liquitex gloss varnish, I actually spray a layer of varnish onto the paper and I let it set up overnight. You got to be very careful with this process, and I use an eye water spray brush to apply the fine mist of varnish so the paint is not disturbed. But I have concerns about my students spraying varnish, whether it be the gloss varnish or Krylon archival varnish. And when I use this, I usually spray more than one coat, probably 2, maybe 3 sometimes. But you need to use this in a well-ventilated facility where I can isolate the painting within the vent system and the toxic vapors are sucked out. This is a solvent-based varnish. But what am I going to do today? Today, I'm going to use Dorland's wax. Since I'm rubbing it on, not spraying it on, I'm not going to have particulates becoming atomized into the air. I apply the wax with a polyester cloth. Small pieces of leftover canvas. This is a polyester canvas that I paint on. I always save the strips that are left over when I stretch a canvas because they're useful for other things. And in this case, it's a wonderful heavy material that makes an excellent application pad for the Dorland's wax. So I have quite a bit on here, and I'll begin to rub it into the paper. I like to apply the Dorland's wax in thin layers using a circular motion. And I'm rubbing it into Arches cold press 140-pound watercolor paper. You should wear gloves when you do this. Those type of surgical gloves might be a good idea. Protect your skin from getting the wax on your hand. I don't want to rub too much right now. I just want to get a nice, it's like polishing your car, nice application of the Dorland's wax on the surface of the painting. And because it's solvent base, it's not activating the watercolor paint. You want to use a clean, relatively soft, lint-free rag to do this, like I'm doing. And apply the wax in gentle circular motion. I'm not pressing too hard. Just enough pressure to work the wax into the paper. And as I do it, I'm looking very closely at the surface of my painting to make sure I'm not working in any little filaments, especially it's a snow scene. So anything, any little cat hairs, for example, or pieces of thread would dramatically show up. I put that little pad back in here and I close it. Now, I angle it into the light just to make sure I could see by the reflection that the painting is evenly coated, and it is. And if I did see on the snow scene a little piece of lint or something that was going to be very annoying, probably I would take my X-Acto knife and gently lift it off. But I don't see anything like that right now, so we're in good shape. So what do we do next? I'm going to leave it overnight for a full 24 hours. So when I come back here at 7 a.m. tomorrow, I'll be ready to give it a buffing. Waiting 24 hours before giving the wax its first buffing allows the wax to set up and harden nicely. But I wouldn't let it go much longer than 24 hours because then it gets a little too hard to establish a nice satin finish with the buffing. It's the next day and the wax has hardened significantly and has a wonderful soft sheen to it. And I could easily be happy with this finish because it is not reflective, and I like that in watercolor. Even the darks have a nice matte quality to it. But I will buff it a bit. And in circular motion, I'll begin to rub the surface. I'm not applying a lot of pressure, not pressing into it. And I'm not rubbing back and forth like that. I want to maintain a nice, even circular motion. Take a look at it now. Yes, it is giving it a little bit of a sheen. Buffing it is also bringing out the natural textural quality of cold press Arches paper, aside from giving it a bit of a shine. The best material for buffing Dorland's wax that has been applied to watercolor painting is either a white microfiber cloth, an old t-shirt, or cheesecloth. And after I finish buffing this first application of Dorland's wax, I usually apply a second thin layer of wax to the painting. A second application of wax will offer enhanced protection against ultraviolet light. The painting seems to have slightly added depth through the buffing process. Okay, that's it. That's all I have to do to the surface of this. This is almost ready for mounting. I do one more thing. If the support and the back of the watercolor painting itself are not properly sealed, and for sealing, I usually use GAC 100. Impurities in the wood could possibly leach up into the paper, and the painting may eventually become discolored. This is called support-induced discoloration, and it can easily be prevented by applying the GAC 100 on both the wood and the watercolor paper. I apply 2 coats. I apply a coat, let it dry, and then apply a second coat to the top of my wood panel. This prevents any impurities from seeping into the watercolor paper. But I take it a step further. I not only apply the 2 coats here, but I apply an additional coat to the back of my watercolor paper to seal that also before I attach it permanently to the ground. I always shake everything before I open it. I don't know if it's necessary with this. There's nothing on the bottle that says shake. Squirt a little out and brush it on. Oh yes, that got right into the wood. See how the wood darkened there? 2 coats is imperative. And I don't apply it on thickly. You don't want to do that. You want to apply nice, even coats. And make sure you're using a clean brush. Also do the sides. I'm going to put this aside, let it dry, and I'll give it maybe 2 hours, and I'll recoat it one more time. And then I'll wait till tomorrow to mount the painting onto the panel. I also want to apply a coat to the back of my painting to seal it. Another layer of protection to prevent ground support discoloration. Fancy term. Simply means staining the paper. Okay, the paper is going to curl up a bit. This is a water-based material. The fibers on the back of the paper are expanding because they're absorbing some water. The paper should relax a bit as it dries. Get this out of my way. Lay it face down on my table and let it dry. I'm only going to apply 1 coat to the back. That's enough because the panel will be sealed with 2 coats. I allow the GAC 100 that you watched me paint on the top of this and the back of the watercolor painting to set up for 24 hours. After 24 hours, you're good to move on to the next step. And what is the next step? The next step is I'm going to attach my painting to the Cradled mounting board that I have here. What I do, I don't think I pointed this out. See if the camera can pick this up. When I begin a watercolor painting on a fresh piece of paper, this is a work in progress, I square off the painting to the exact size that I want and usually use some kind of tape to hold it down. These paintings are designed to be 8 by 10. I measure everything out with my ruler, make sure everything is exactly square. I don't want any kind of crazy angles. And draw my guidelines for my tape when I eventually tape it down to the mounting board that I'm going to paint on. And I carry these guidelines to the edge of the paper, like you see here. That's a great aid because what I'm able to do is I place my paper then on a light box, and on this side of the paper I redraw the guide marks. And this helps me when I mount the painting onto the panel. Helps me position this exactly where I want it to go. I simply line it up with my guide marks. Why don't I cut the paper down to the size I need? Well, what happens is if you do that and you place this after everything's been coated with the gloss medium, is some gloss medium is going to squeeze out. And if you don't have excess paper to catch it, the oozing gloss medium could get onto the face of the painting, and you don't want that to happen. You want to keep it clean as possible, free of gloss medium. That's about it. Let's move on to the next step. To glue the painting to the panel, I used Liquitex Gloss Medium Super Heavy Gel. But the Super Heavy Gel was too thick to use without thinning it down, so I thinned it down to a thick, creamy consistency. Make sure you have all your supplies at hand, ready to go. I usually cover my table with a piece of polyethylene drop cloth that I usually buy at a local hardware store. So let's begin. So the next thing I do is I brush on the gel medium, and I usually brush it onto my support first. And I'm looking at it carefully, making sure there are no lumps. And I make sure it's evenly coated, not too thick, but thick enough. Then we move on to this. And the register marks, the alignment marks that I have on here are a great asset because it tells me exactly where to put the gloss medium. When you're brushing the gel medium onto the paper, always have a paper towel on hand. I'm being very careful not to move my paper because I don't want to move it into the area where there's gloss medium and get that on the surface of my painting. Okay, I think we're about ready to go. To attach the painting to the panel, I leave the paper in place and I lift the panel and position it against the back of the painting, lining it up carefully with the registration marks that I had drawn on the back of the painting. Then after I press the panel onto the back of the painting, I usually wipe off excess gel medium that has oozed out onto the sides of the paper. Let's move it over to the side now. I have a clean cutting board that I wipe down with an alcohol solution, so there's nothing on it. But what I do is I place a piece of pre-cut parchment paper on it, just large enough to accommodate the painting. Lay it down, face down on that parchment paper. Double check the alignment, because at this stage you can easily move it around and get it right up to the registration marks where I need it to be. Final step is you want to weight it down. You need to apply a good amount of pressure to the panel so it presses into the back of the watercolor paper. This 10-pound weight will easily span all four sides of the painting, applying uniform pressure to the painting. I have some smaller weights that I also add to increase the pressure. If the painting was too large for the weight to span four sides of it, I probably would have covered the back of the painting with a piece of plywood that was large enough to cover the back of the painting. The objective is to apply even pressure. Then I would put the weight on top of the plywood. Next, I'll let it set for about an hour, and then I'll come back and take a peek and see how things are setting up. It's been a little over an hour since I attached the painting to the panel. It looks fairly good. I'll put it face down against the parchment paper once again. And next I put the weight back onto the back of the painting and I'll let it set up overnight. So it's the next day. Let's see what we got here. Looks good. Now the final step is to trim off the excess paper, and you can see I already did it on this side. And here's how I like to do it. Always use a very sharp razor blade, a new razor blade. I just put this razor blade in there. Flip your painting over, and then along the edge run that blade. But don't directly run the blade along the wood. I never have done it that way. I'm always afraid, because I'm using a razor blade, that I'm going to dig into the wood. So what I use is a large spackle knife, steel spackle knife, nice thin edge that I can press tightly against the edge, really press it into that edge. And then I take my knife and I cut along the spackle knife. And I don't attempt to cut it in one shot. I like to drag it back and forth gently multiple times until I feel I have cut through the paper and I can easily pull it away. And as I get down, I increase the pressure a little bit more. There we go. Look at that. Nice. See, that's relatively close. I still have a little work to do, but it's good. Up against the edge. It gives me a very clean, straight edge. One more side left. What's nice about this, you could use a ruler. I've used thin rulers to do the same thing, but what's nice about this spackle knife is it has a handle, so you could apply some pressure very easily. Yeah, get it close, some external pressure. And drag the knife carefully along the edge. Now there's no danger of me nicking the wood. Okay, good. Now the very last thing I do is I take a 200 grit sandpaper and I just sand that edge flat, because there is a little overlap at that point. The paper extends slightly beyond. But a 200 grit sandpaper is enough to clean the edge down nicely. And notice I'm not going back and forth like this. I'm riding the paper along the length of the edge. That's important. Always sand along the edge. Never sand against the paper back and forth like that. And using a drafting brush, I like to brush away the dust. If I am getting a little bit of a, look at that, you see, a little bit of a flap of paper develop, I can very carefully sand like this, push into it. Never push this way, away from the surface. Always push gently into the surface to remove that burr of paper. This is what I'm talking about right here. You see that? See that little bit of lip of paper? Huh, that just broke off because I was sanding it. But if you need to remove something like that, push into the paper like this. Don't pull that way. You can damage your painting if you do that. And what would be better to use for that purpose is a nice nail file emery board. So the painting is mounted and ready to either be put into a frame, or I can edge it off with a nice iron-on veneer. Maybe even a metallic veneer around the edge would look good. This is my standard way of mounting the watercolor paintings that I attach to a panel. I made the frame myself. And I like the idea of the floater frame, giving it that little black border. I think it's a nice solution. And also the purpose of a frame is to protect your painting. The edge can't get damaged because it's in this frame. So you have a lot of options to finish it off. And just one more thing. With the buffing of the wax, I got myself a very soft shoe shine brush. And I have found that's the best way to do the final buffing. Absolutely, because the hairs on the shoe shine brush effectively get into the texture of the paper and allow you to create a nice, even, sort of satiny shine. The way I recommend doing it is use the cloth for the initial buffing and application. I have the same polyester cloth in there that I applied it on originally, but I do all the final buffing with the brush because it responds nicely to the texture of the cold press Arches paper. I hope this video on mounting watercolor paper onto a panel is helpful and that you enjoyed watching it. Thanks for watching.